Conspiracies of Darth Vader. In the shadows of galactic history, where truth and deception intertwine like the eternal dance between light and darkness, there exists a figure whose very existence is built upon layers of conspiracy, manipulation, and carefully guarded secrets. Darth Vader, the Dark Lord of the Sith, the Emperor's iron fist and the galaxy's most feared enforcer. But how much of what we believe about him is truth, and how much is carefully constructed illusion? The black armor, the mechanical breathing, the blood-red lightsaber cutting through the darkness. These are the images that strike terror into the hearts of those who dare oppose the galactic empire. Yet, beneath that imposing facade lies not one conspiracy, but dozens. Secrets within secrets, plans within plans, deceptions so carefully layered that even after his death, after his redemption, after the fall of the empire itself, the galaxy is still uncovering the depths of what was hidden. Tonight, we descend into the labyrinth of conspiracies surrounding Darth Vader. Not just the simple story of Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side, but the hidden machinations, the secret plots, the concealed truths that shaped one of the most pivotal figures in galactic history. From the mystery of his very conception to the intentional weaknesses built into his armor, from the secret armies he commanded to the replacement apprentices trained in shadow, from the hunts he orchestrated to the conspiracies he himself uncovered and fell victim to. This is the complete chronicle of deception surrounding the Dark Lord of the Sith. These are stories not widely known across the galaxy, tales buried in imperial records, whispered among survivors, pieced together from fragments of truth and speculation. Some of these conspiracies were revealed only after Vader's death. Others remain theories, plausible explanations for events that never quite added up. And still others are confirmed facts that somehow feel more unbelievable than fiction. So settle in, close your eyes, and prepare to journey into the depths of shadow and secrecy. Prepare to question everything you thought you knew about the man in the black mask. Because in the world of the Sith, nothing is ever quite what it seems. And the greatest weapon is not a lightsaber or a star destroyer, but a well-kept secret, the hidden identity, conspiracy of the mask. The galaxy knew Darth Vader. They knew him as a towering figure of death, as the Emperor's right hand, as the merciless enforcer who brought entire star systems to their knees. What they did not know was that beneath the mask lived the ghost of Anakin Skywalker, once the greatest hero of the Clone Wars, the chosen one prophesied to bring balance to the Force. This was no accident. This was the first and perhaps greatest conspiracy surrounding Vader. The systematic erasure of Anakin Skywalker from galactic memory, and the creation of Darth Vader as something new, something inhuman, something to be feared beyond rational thought. Emperor Palpatine understood the power of perception. During the Clone Wars, Anakin Skywalker had been a household name. His daring rescues, his victories against impossible odds, his reputation as the hero with no fear, had made him beloved by Republic citizens across thousands of worlds. Holonet broadcasts featured his exploits. Children played with toys bearing his likeness. He represented everything the Jedi Order stood for: courage, selflessness, the protection of the innocent. When Anakin fell, when he became Vader and helped orchestrate the destruction of the Jedi Order, Palpatine made a calculated decision. The galaxy could not know that their hero had become their nightmare. Such a revelation would undermine the carefully constructed narrative that the Jedi had betrayed the Republic and attempted to assassinate the Chancellor. If citizens knew that Anakin Skywalker, poster child of the Jedi, had actually turned against them and now served the Emperor, questions would arise. Uncomfortable questions about who had truly betrayed whom. James Luceno, chronicling the rise of the Empire, described how these rumors served a purpose. Vader was the Empire's first terror weapon. His very existence posed questions that had no comfortable answers. In a galaxy where information was power, where knowledge could be researched and verified, Darth Vader represented something unknowable. And what is unknowable is infinitely more terrifying than what can be understood. The few who did know Vader's true identity understood the value of silence. Obi-Wan Kenobi, who had left Anakin burning on the banks of Mustafar, chose to tell Luke that Darth Vader betrayed and murdered your father, a lie from a certain point of view. It was easier than explaining that the father Luke had never known had become the galaxy's greatest monster. Master Yoda kept the secret, understanding that hope for the future depended on Luke not knowing the depths of his father's fall until the moment was right. Within the Empire, only a handful of individuals pieced together the truth. Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin, who had worked alongside Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars, gradually became convinced that Vader was the young Jedi he had once known. Vader's fighting style, the way he interacted with the stormtroopers, even the way his masked eyes seemed to recognize Tarkin, all pointed to a shared history. Yet Tarkin kept this knowledge to himself, understanding that speculating aloud about the Dark Lord's past would be dangerous and ultimately pointless. Grand Admiral Thrawn, the brilliant Chiss strategist, also deduced Vader's true identity after encountering him. Thrawn had met Anakin Skywalker during the Clone Wars, when their paths crossed on several missions, when he later worked with Vader. Thrawn's analytical mind recognized patterns of speech, tactical decisions, and behavior that could only belong to one person. Like Tarkin, Thrawn wisely kept his conclusions private, though he occasionally hinted at his knowledge to Vader himself. The Inquisitors, former Jedi who hunted their old comrades for the Empire, knew that Vader had once been Anakin Skywalker. Many of them had trained in the Jedi Temple alongside him, or heard stories of his exploits during the Clone Wars. When Vader trained them in the ways of the dark side, some recognized fighting techniques that had once belonged to the Jedi Knight. Yet they too remained silent, partly from fear, partly from the understanding that the man they had known was truly dead, replaced by something darker. What made this conspiracy particularly effective was that most citizens of the galaxy had no reason to connect Vader to Anakin Skywalker. To them, Anakin was simply another Jedi who had died during Order 66. The official Imperial story claimed that the Jedi had attempted a coup, that they had tried to assassinate Chancellor Palpatine and seize control of the Republic. In the resulting purge, nearly all Jedi were killed, including the famous Anakin Skywalker cut down in the defense of the new Emperor. This narrative fit perfectly with the sudden appearance of Darth Vader as Palpatine's new right hand. One Force user had fallen, another had risen to take his place in service to the Empire. For ordinary Imperial officers and troops, Vader's true nature remained a source of speculation and unease. They knew he was powerful, that he could crush a man's throat with a gesture, that he commanded authority beyond any rank or title. They knew the Emperor trusted him with important missions and gave him authority over entire operations. But his past, his face beneath the mask, his true identity, these remained mysteries that sparked endless debate in officers' messes and barracks across the Empire. Some high-ranking officers resented Vader precisely because of this mystery. He had appeared from nowhere, already wielding immense authority, answering only to the Emperor himself. Officers who had spent decades climbing the imperial hierarchy found themselves outranked by this masked figure whose qualifications and background were completely unknown. This resentment would occasionally surface in conspiracies against Vader, plots born from jealousy and fear of the unknown. The conspiracy of Vader's identity extended even to those closest to the truth. When Vader discovered he had a son, when he learned that Luke Skywalker had survived Padmé's death, he kept this information carefully guarded. The Emperor knew, of course. Palpatine was the one who revealed Luke's identity to Vader after the destruction of the Death Star. But beyond the two Sith Lords, knowledge of Luke's parentage remained closely held. Vader's famous offer to Luke on Bespin, "Join me and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son," was made in private, with only the two Skywalkers present to hear it. The galaxy at large continued to believe that Anakin Skywalker had died as a hero during the Clone Wars, one more casualty of the Jedi betrayal. Darth Vader remained a mysterious enforcer of the Empire, a monster in black armor whose origins were unknown and whose death on the second Death Star seemed fitting for such a villain. The fact that these two figures were one and the same, that the greatest hero of the Republic had become the greatest weapon of the Empire, remained known to only a handful of people. This secret held for approximately 28 standard years after the Battle of Endor. During that time, Leia built a distinguished political career in the New Republic. She became one of the most respected senators, known for her dedication to democratic ideals and her unwavering opposition to imperial remnants. She had a family, marrying the smuggler-turned-General Han Solo, having a son named Ben. Her life seemed to be one of public service and private happiness, built on foundations of integrity and trust. The revelation, when it finally came, was devastating. A political rival seeking to undermine Leia's campaign to become first senator of the New Republic obtained proof of her parentage and revealed it to the Galactic Senate. In one moment, everything changed. The galaxy learned that Senator Leia Organa, hero of the rebellion, was the daughter of Darth Vader, that Luke Skywalker, the legendary Jedi Master rebuilding the Order, was Vader's son, that the last of the Skywalker bloodline were directly descended from one of the most feared tyrants in galactic history. The public reaction was immediate and brutal. Many felt betrayed by Leia's Decades of deception. Her political career was destroyed in an instant. The revelation also affected Luke, though he was more removed from politics. Questions arose about the Jedi. Could they be trusted if their Grand Master had kept such a significant secret for so long? Did Force sensitivity run in families mean that Luke and Leia carried the same capacity for darkness that had consumed their father? Even more tragically, the revelation reached Ben Solo at exactly the wrong moment in his development. Training to become a Jedi under his Uncle Luke, young Ben learned about his grandfather not from his mother or his Jedi teacher, but from a political enemy's public expose. The knowledge that he was the grandson of Darth Vader, combined with his own struggles with the dark side, contributed to his eventual fall and transformation into Kylo Ren. The conspiracy of Vader's hidden identity ultimately failed, as all secrets eventually do. But it succeeded long enough to shape the course of galactic history. It allowed the Empire to maintain its narrative about the Jedi betrayal. It created an aura of terror around Vader that made him more effective as an enforcer. It protected Luke and Leia in the vulnerable years after the Empire's fall, and it demonstrated a truth that Palpatine understood well. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is not what people know, but what they don't know, what they fear, what they can only imagine in their darkest nightmares. Anakin Skywalker died on Mustafar. At least as far as most of the galaxy was concerned, what emerged from those flames was something new, something unknown, something terrifying precisely because it had no past, no origin, no explanation. Darth Vader was a mystery, wrapped in black armor, and that mystery was by design. The greatest conspiracy was the simplest one, that the hero and the villain were the same person, and the galaxy never knew. The Immaculate Deception, Conspiracy of Creation. Long before Vader donned his black armor, before Anakin Skywalker took his first breath, a conspiracy may have already been in motion. This is perhaps the darkest and most disturbing theory surrounding Darth Vader, that his very existence, his conception, his birth, were not natural occurrences, but deliberate acts of Sith manipulation. That Anakin Skywalker was created, engineered, called into being by the very darkness he was destined to fight. The story begins on Tatooine, in the slave quarters of a remote moisture farm, where a woman named Shmi Skywalker lived with her young son. When Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn encountered the boy and tested his blood, he discovered something impossible, a midi-chlorian count of over 20,000 per cell, higher than any Jedi on record, higher even than Master Yoda. This child was powerful beyond measure, a concentration of force ability that defied all known precedent. For the Jedi, this sparked immediate speculation. Qui-Gon came to believe that Anakin was the Chosen One, a being prophesied in ancient texts, conceived by the midi-chlorians themselves, destined to bring balance to the Force and destroy the Sith. The idea of a virgin birth, of a child born directly from the Force without biological father, fit perfectly with Jedi prophecy. Here was their Messiah, their Savior, the one who would finally end the eternal conflict between light and dark. But there was another explanation, one far more sinister, one that Palpatine himself hinted at years later. During the Clone Wars, as Palpatine slowly manipulated Anakin toward the dark side, he told the young Jedi Knight a story, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. According to this tale, Darth Plagueis was a dark lord of the Sith, so powerful and wise that he could use the Force to influence the midi-chlorians to create life. He could keep those he cared about from dying. He became so powerful that the only thing he feared was losing his power, which eventually he did when his apprentice killed him in his sleep. The knowing way Palpatine delivered this story, the meaningful pauses, the direct looks at Anakin, all suggested he was implying something more. Something about Anakin's own mysterious birth. Something about who might have influenced those midi-chlorians to create life in Shmi Skywalker's womb. In an early draft of the script for Revenge of the Sith, this implication became explicit. In a scene that was ultimately cut from the final film, Palpatine reveals the truth to Anakin as he completes his turn to the dark side. "I arranged for your conception," the Sith Lord says. "I used the power of the Force to will the midi-chlorians to start the cell divisions that created you. You could almost think of me as your father." George Lucas ultimately decided to remove this revelation, leaving Anakin's origins ambiguous, open to interpretation. But the implication remained, woven into the fabric of the story. If Darth Plagueis could manipulate midi-chlorians to create life, and if Palpatine was Plagueis's apprentice, learned his master's secrets, and eventually killed him, then who else might have the knowledge and the will to create a child of the Force? The conspiracy theory gained additional support from Legends material, particularly James Luceno's novel Darth Plagueis. In this now non-canonical but influential work, Plagueis and his apprentice Sidious conducted experiments with the Force, attempting to create life, seeking to extend their power over the very essence of existence. These experiments occurred approximately 9 years before the discovery of Anakin on Tatooine. The timing was suspicious, to say the least. According to the Legends account, Plagueis and Sidious attempted to bend the midi-chlorians to their will, to force the Force itself to serve their purposes. But the Force, which has its own will, resisted their manipulation. More than resisted, it retaliated. In response to the Sith's attempt to create a weapon of darkness, the Force conceived a child of light. The midi-chlorians engineered the birth of a child who would be powerful enough to destroy the Sith, to bring balance by eliminating the darkness that Plagueis and Sidious represented. In this interpretation, both theories are true. The Sith did attempt to create life through midi-chlorian manipulation, but they failed to create what they wanted. Instead, they inadvertently triggered the creation of the Chosen One, the very instrument of their destruction. Anakin was both their creation and their doom, born from their dark experiments, but destined to betray and ultimately destroy them. The modern canon approached this question more ambiguously. In Charles Soule's Darth Vader comics, published by Marvel as part of the official Star Wars canon, there is a scene that seems to confirm Palpatine's role in Anakin's creation. Vader, journeying through a doorway between life and the realm of the living Force, experiences visions of his past. In one particularly striking panel, he sees his mother Shmi during her pregnancy, with Palpatine's shadowy figure looming behind her, hands outstretched, dark energy swirling around her womb. The implications seemed clear. This was Palpatine using Sith sorcery to manipulate the midi-chlorians, creating Anakin Skywalker. Fans pointed to this as proof that the conspiracy theory was true, that Vader had been artificially created by the very master he served. This clarification left the question deliberately unanswered. Was Anakin created by Palpatine? By Plagueis? By the Force itself in response to the Sith? Or was he simply a child born through natural means who happened to have an unprecedented connection to the Force? Lucas himself suggested that the answer should be left to each viewer's interpretation, that the mystery is part of what makes the mythology work. Yet, the conspiracy theory persists for good reason. It makes too much sense from a narrative perspective. Palpatine's obsession with Anakin, his decades-long manipulation of the boy, his refusal to let Vader die on Mustafar, even though he was horribly maimed and weakened, all of this suggests a deeper connection than simply recognizing a powerful potential apprentice. If Palpatine had indeed created Anakin, or been involved in his creation, then the fallen Jedi was not just an apprentice, but a project, a work of art, a living experiment in the manipulation of the Force itself. It would explain why Palpatine went to such lengths to corrupt Anakin specifically. There were other powerful Jedi who might have been turned: Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, even Yoda himself. But Palpatine fixated on Anakin with single-minded intensity, spending years planting seeds of doubt, creating situations that would challenge the young Jedi's faith in the Order, positioning himself as the mentor and father figure Anakin never had. If Anakin was Palpatine's creation, then this obsession makes perfect sense. You don't abandon your greatest achievement just because the outcome is not exactly what you planned. The conspiracies also cast Anakin's role as the chosen one in a different light. In the traditional interpretation, he is the chosen one because he was conceived by the Force to bring balance. He fulfills this prophecy by destroying the Sith, first by killing Palpatine's enemies and enabling the rise of the Empire, then ultimately by killing Palpatine himself and saving his son. Balance is achieved through Anakin's sacrifice. But if Anakin was created by Palpatine or Plagueis, then the prophecy takes on darker implications. The chosen one was not purely good, not a child of light sent to destroy darkness. He was born from darkness, created by Sith manipulation, and yet still managed to fulfill his destiny of bringing balance. This suggests a more complex understanding of the Force. That balance is not simply the triumph of light over dark, but a recognition that both are necessary, that even from the darkest acts can come redemption, that the Force works through even the most twisted circumstances to achieve its ends. There's also the question of timing and circumstance. Shmi Skywalker was a slave on Tatooine, one of the most remote and lawless planets in the Outer Rim. She became pregnant with Anakin around the time that Darth Plagueis was conducting his experiments with midi-chlorians, when he and his apprentice, Sidious, were attempting to create life through manipulation of the Force. Tatooine was beyond the reach of the Republic, beyond the jurisdiction of the Jedi, a place where someone could disappear, where a strange birth could occur without attracting unwanted attention. It's entirely possible that Shmi was targeted specifically because of these factors. If you were a Sith Lord attempting to create a child through force manipulation, you would want to do so in a place where your experiment would not be discovered, where a virgin birth would not immediately attract Jedi investigation. Tatooine was perfect, a backwater world where slaves were born and died without record, where the Jedi never ventured, where a child with extraordinary force sensitivity could grow to the age of 9 before anyone even tested him for midi-chlorians. The conspiracy theory also addresses one of the most troubling aspects of Anakin's story, his attachment to his mother and later to Padmé. If Anakin was conceived naturally, why was he so uniquely susceptible to the fear of loss? Other Jedi dealt with attachment. Other Force-sensitive children had mothers they left behind. But Anakin's attachments were different in intensity, in their power to drive his decisions, in their ability to override his Jedi training and principles. If Palpatine had indeed influenced Anakin's creation, he could have built these vulnerabilities in from the beginning, not explicitly engineering a weakness, but knowing that a child created through midi-chlorian manipulation, a child without a father, growing up in slavery, separated from a loving mother, would develop powerful attachments that could later be exploited. Every element of Anakin's early life, the slavery, the separation from Shmi, the role Qui-Gon played in taking him away, even the promise to return for his mother that was never fulfilled, all of it could have been predicted, perhaps even orchestrated, to create a young man who would be vulnerable to manipulation through his fears of loss. Whether the conspiracy is true or not, its existence shapes our understanding of Vader. If Anakin was created by the Sith, then his entire life was a manipulation, every choice predetermined, every path leading inevitably to the dark side. His fall becomes less a tragic failure of will and more the inevitable outcome of forces set in motion before he was even born. His redemption becomes even more remarkable, breaking free from not just Palpatine's influence, but potentially from the very purpose for which he was created. If Anakin was conceived by the Force itself, in response to the Sith's actions, then his role as the chosen one is confirmed, but with the understanding that even the prophecy arose from manipulation, that the Force's response to darkness was itself prompted by Sith experimentation. Balance comes not from pure good overcoming pure evil, but from a child born of both, torn between destinies, ultimately choosing sacrifice over power. And if Anakin's conception was simply a natural mystery, unexplained by either Sith interference or Force prophecy, then his story becomes one of random chance and terrible choices, of a boy with extraordinary gifts and tragic flaws, shaped by circumstances into both hero and monster, redeemed not by destiny, but by love. The truth, as is so often the case in Star Wars, is left for each observer to determine. But the conspiracy theory persists, whispered in the shadows of Star Wars lore, suggesting that the greatest conspiracy surrounding Darth Vader may have begun 9 years before the Battle of Naboo on a backwater desert world, in the womb of a slave woman who could not explain her pregnancy. That everything that followed, the rise, the fall, the empire, the rebellion, the ultimate redemption, all of it may have been set in motion by a Sith Lord's attempt to create life itself. And whether that attempt succeeded or failed may be the most important question in the entire Star Wars saga, and one that may never be definitively answered. The Armor Conspiracy, a prison of Palpatine's design. When Anakin Skywalker's broken, burning body was recovered from the volcanic banks of Mustafar, Palpatine faced a critical decision. His new apprentice, the one he had spent years manipulating and corrupting, was dying. Vader's limbs had been severed, his lungs seared by volcanic ash, his body so badly damaged that survival seemed impossible. Most masters would have left such a ruined apprentice to die, searching for a new student to train. But Palpatine made a different choice. He would save Anakin's life, but in doing so, he would ensure that his new apprentice would never become a true threat to his power. The armor that emerged from Palpatine's reconstruction of Vader would become iconic. Black durasteel plates, a flowing cape, and that distinctive helmet with its skull-like visage and triangular respirator. To the galaxy, this armor represented power, fear, and the unstoppable might of the Empire. But to those who understood its construction, the armor told a different story, one of deliberate weakness, of calculated limitations, of a master who trusted his apprentice with vast authority, but never with the power to truly challenge him. The conspiracy surrounding Vader's armor centers on a disturbing possibility that Emperor Palpatine intentionally designed the suit with weaknesses, using outdated technology and vulnerable systems to ensure that his powerful apprentice could never overthrow him. This was not simply about saving Vader's life. It was about controlling it, making the Dark Lord dependent on Imperial technology and vulnerable to Palpatine's particular abilities. The evidence for this conspiracy is extensive and comes from multiple sources. In Legends material, particularly James Luceno's novel Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader, it is revealed that Vader's reconstruction was based on technology from an earlier era. Specifically, the suit incorporated techniques and designs developed during the reconstruction of General Grievous, the cyborg military commander of the Separatist forces during the Clone Wars. This technology was already considered outdated when it was used on Grievous, and it was certainly obsolete by the time it was applied to Vader years later. Why would Palpatine, emperor of a galaxy-spanning civilization with access to the most advanced medical technology imaginable, use outdated techniques to rebuild his most important enforcer? The answer suggested by the conspiracy is simple. Because modern cybernetics would have made Vader too powerful, too independent, too capable of challenging his master's authority. The injuries on Mustafar changed everything. The loss of his organic limbs meant that Vader's connection to the Force was physically diminished. Midi-chlorians existed in living cells, and with much of his body replaced by mechanical components, Vader's total midi-chlorian count was dramatically reduced. He would never reach the heights of power that Anakin Skywalker might have achieved. Palpatine, recognizing this, could have attempted to minimize the loss. Advanced cybernetics, cutting-edge prosthetics, the most sophisticated systems available, all could have preserved more of Vader's organic body, maintained more of his Force potential. Instead, Palpatine chose crude, bulky replacements. The cybernetic limbs were functional, but clumsy compared to Vader's original flesh and bone. The breathing apparatus was necessary but restrictive, limiting his mobility and requiring constant mechanical respiration. The armor was heavy, cumbersome, a constant reminder of physical limitation. Every day, Vader existed in a shell that was both life support and prison. But the most damning evidence of intentional design flaw comes from the armor's vulnerability to Force lightning, Palpatine's signature attack. According to multiple sources, including Lucino's work and technical readouts published in Star Wars reference materials, Vader's suit was deliberately not shielded against electrical attack. The delicate circuits that controlled his breathing, his heart function, his limb movements, all were vulnerable to electrical discharge. Palpatine knew this. He had overseen the reconstruction personally. He understood the suit specifications in intimate detail. The fact that he deliberately left his apprentice vulnerable to his own favorite method of attack speaks volumes about the power dynamic he intended to maintain. At any moment, Palpatine could threaten or actually harm Vader with Force lightning. Knowing that the cyborg Sith Lord could not effectively defend against it without risking complete systems failure, this vulnerability was not theoretical. On at least one occasion documented in expanded universe material, Palpatine explicitly threatened Vader with Force lightning, reminding his apprentice of his dependence and vulnerability. The message was clear. You serve at my pleasure. Your life continues because I allow it. And should you ever truly challenge me, I have a weapon that can end you before you strike. The vulnerability would ultimately be Vader's undoing. When he finally turned against his master during the Battle of Endor, when he seized Palpatine and hurled him down the shaft of the second Death Star, the Emperor's lightning ravaged Vader's systems. The armor failed, the life support systems shorted out. The man who had finally found redemption, who had finally become Anakin Skywalker again, long enough to save his son, died not from physical wounds, but from the failure of the very systems that had kept him alive. Some have argued that this vulnerability was not intentional, that Palpatine simply used what was available, that the technology of the era could not adequately shield complex electronic systems from Force lightning. But this argument fails under scrutiny. Droid technology regularly incorporated shielding against electrical attack. Even during the Clone Wars, battle droids were often equipped to withstand ion blasts and electrical weapons. If droids mass-produced by the millions could have such protections, surely the Emperor's personal enforcer's life support system could have been better shielded. The conspiracy goes deeper than simple vulnerability, however. Vader himself came to suspect that the limitations of his armor were deliberate. He recognized that his fighting style had changed after Mustafar, that he had lost the speed and agility that had made him such a formidable duelist. The armor was heavy, restrictive, preventing the acrobatic movements and rapid strikes that had characterized Anakin Skywalker's combat technique. Instead, Vader had to develop a new style, methodical, powerful, wearing opponents down through relentless assault rather than overwhelming them with speed. Vader tried to upgrade his armor multiple times. In Legends material, he had the suit's circulatory board reinforced to provide some protection against electrical attack. But these improvements were limited. The fundamental design of the suit, the way it integrated with his damaged body, meant that comprehensive upgrades would require removing the entire suit apparatus, a process that would be agonizingly painful and might not succeed. There was always the risk that improvements could fail, that attempting to upgrade could lead to system failures that would kill him. The Emperor also offered upgrades at various points, including at least one instance where a complete new suit was proposed, Vader 2.0, with all the latest technology. But accepting these upgrades would have required trusting Palpatine to rebuild him again, surrendering himself to his master's medical droids once more, becoming completely vulnerable during a lengthy reconstruction process. Vader, increasingly paranoid and distrustful, declined these offers. He suspected, probably correctly, that any rebuilt suit would incorporate the same deliberate vulnerabilities, perhaps new ones, ensuring his continued dependence. There was also the psychological dimension of the armor. It was constantly painful to wear. The neural interfaces caused chronic pain. The breathing apparatus was uncomfortable. The full-body suit itched and chafed. Every moment of every day, Vader experienced physical suffering. This was not entirely accidental. Sith philosophy held that pain fueled the dark side, that suffering strengthened a dark side user's connection to the Force. Palpatine may have reasoned that an apprentice in constant pain would be a more effective servant of the dark side. But the pain also served as a control mechanism. It kept Vader focused on his immediate physical experience rather than on long-term planning or philosophical contemplation. It made him depend on Bacta tanks for temporary relief, Bacta that was controlled and provided by the Empire. It made him more vulnerable to emotional manipulation, as someone in constant physical agony is more susceptible to anger, easier to direct toward targets Palpatine chose. The armor was also claustrophobic. Vader, who had spent his early life under the open skies of Tatooine, who had gloried in the freedom of flying starfighters through space, was now trapped in a sealed suit, breathing recycled air, his face forever hidden behind an expressionless mask. This psychological torment may have been the cruelest aspect of the armor's design. Vader could never remove the helmet in a normal atmosphere. His damaged lungs could not process regular air. He was literally imprisoned in the suit, unable to feel wind on his face, unable to breathe freely, unable to exist without the mechanical systems that both sustained and confined him. The conspiracy theory suggests that Palpatine designed this imprisonment deliberately, recognizing that physical and psychological torture would make Vader more compliant, more focused on survival and service rather than on accumulating power and plotting rebellion. A content-powerful, well-adjusted Sith apprentice might eventually overthrow his master. This was, after all, the traditional Sith way, but a tormented, limited, dependent apprentice would be too focused on immediate suffering and survival to plan long-term betrayal. Yet, there is a counter-argument to this conspiracy theory, one that complicates the narrative. In the modern Disney canon, some sources suggest that Vader's armor was actually state-of-the-art for its time, that it incorporated sophisticated technology, and provided genuine capabilities. The armor was incredibly durable, able to survive direct hits that would kill an ordinary person. It amplified Vader's strength beyond human levels, allowing him to crush Durasteel with his bare hands. The life support systems, while vulnerable to electricity, were otherwise remarkably reliable, functioning for decades without major failures. From this perspective, the armor's limitations were not deliberate sabotage, but rather the inevitable compromises of medical technology. Palpatine saved Vader's life under desperate circumstances using the best available techniques, and the result was functional but imperfect. The vulnerability to Force lightning was an unfortunate oversight, not a deliberate design flaw. The bulk and weight were necessary to house all the life support systems. The pain was a side effect of extensive nerve damage and cybernetic integration, not an intentional feature. This interpretation is more charitable to Palpatine's motives. It suggests an emperor who valued his apprentice enough to save him despite terrible injuries, who provided the best reconstruction possible under the circumstances, who accepted a diminished but still formidable servant rather than discarding a ruined asset. The armor, from this view, was not a conspiracy, but a tragedy. The best bad option in a situation with no good outcomes. Yet, even this more charitable interpretation does not fully absolve the emperor. Even if the initial reconstruction was done in good faith, Palpatine subsequently refused to authorize major upgrades or improvements. He had decades to provide Vader with better systems, to incorporate new technologies as they became available, to reduce his apprentice's suffering and vulnerability. He chose not to. Whether this was due to the Sith philosophy that suffering strengthens dark side users, or due to deliberate policy of keeping Vader dependent and controllable, the result was the same. An apprentice who remained limited, vulnerable, and in constant pain. The truth, as with so many conspiracies surrounding Vader, likely lies somewhere in the middle. Palpatine probably did save Vader's life as best he could under emergency circumstances. But he also probably recognized the advantages of having an apprentice who was powerful enough to enforce his will, but limited enough to never truly threaten his. What is undeniable is that Vader himself came to view the armor as a prison. His castle on Mustafar, built years later, incorporated a meditation chamber where he could briefly remove the helmet and breathe air that was specially conditioned to support his damaged lungs. These moments of freedom, rare and brief, highlighted the normally constant confinement. Vader was trapped not just in the Empire's service, not just in the dark side, but in his own body, in the very armor that kept him alive. The armor conspiracy reveals a fundamental truth about the relationship between Palpatine and Vader. It was never a partnership of equals, never a traditional Sith master-apprentice dynamic where the apprentice would eventually overthrow the master. From the moment Vader was reconstructed, Palpatine ensured that his apprentice would remain dependent, limited, controllable. The black armor that inspired such fear across the galaxy was also a symbol of subjugation, a prison that its occupant could never escape. Designed by a master who trusted his servant with vast authority, but never with true freedom or the power to challenge his rule. In the end, it was the armor's vulnerability, whether deliberately designed or tragic oversight, that allowed Vader's redemption. Unable to survive Palpatine's lightning, dying from system failures in the throne room of the second Death Star, Anakin Skywalker had one final moment of clarity, one last conversation with his son, before the armor finally ceased its mechanical breathing and the man inside found peace at last. The prison that had held him for decades became his tomb, but in those final moments, he was free. The replacement conspiracy, Silo's shadow program. Darth Vader believed himself to be irreplaceable as Palpatine's chosen apprentice, as the fallen chosen one, as the most feared enforcer in the galaxy. He assumed his position was secure. This assumption was shattered when he discovered one of the most disturbing conspiracies in Imperial history, that for approximately 20 years, the Emperor had been secretly developing potential replacements, training alternative apprentices, creating contingencies in case Vader failed or became insufficient for the Sith Lord's purposes. The architect of this shadow program was a brilliant and disturbing scientist named Dr. Silo. In many ways, Silo's role in Vader's story parallels that of the scientists who created Frankenstein's monster. He was the one who rebuilt Vader after Mustafar, who designed the armor systems, who transformed Anakin Skywalker's ruined body into the cybernetic terror that became Darth Vader. Palpatine had granted Silo unprecedented access to advanced technology and unlimited funding, with one primary objective: keep researching, keep experimenting, keep developing enhanced warriors who could serve the Empire's needs. What Vader did not know, what Silo had kept carefully hidden, was that rebuilding the Emperor's apprentice was only one part of a larger program. While Silo worked on Vader's life support systems and cybernetic enhancements, he was simultaneously developing other projects: genetically modified humanoids, cyborg warriors, hybrid creations that combined organic force sensitivity with technological augmentation. These creatures were being trained in secret, groomed to potentially replace Vader if the Dark Lord ever failed his master's expectations or became too damaged, too rebellious, or too weak to continue serving. The revelation came after Vader's greatest failure, when the Death Star was destroyed at the Battle of Yavin, when a single rebel pilot fired the shot that obliterated the Empire's ultimate weapon. Palpatine was furious. The Death Star had represented decades of planning, enormous resources, a project meant to secure Imperial rule for generations. Its destruction was not just a military setback, but a humiliation for an emperor who prided himself on absolute control. Vader had been present at the Battle of Yavin. He had engaged the rebel fighters personally, destroying numerous X-Wings in his custom T-Y-E Advanced. He had actually targeted the very pilot who would eventually make the critical shot, Luke Skywalker, though neither knew their relationship at that moment. But Vader had failed to prevent the Death Star's destruction, and in the Sith tradition, failure must have consequences. The consequence Palpatine chose was particularly cruel. He activated Silo's program, bringing forth the alternative warriors who had been training in secret for years. These were Vader's potential replacements, and now they were being given their chance to prove themselves superior. Each of these candidates had been in development for approximately 2 decades, meaning that the program began not long after Vader's own reconstruction. Palpatine and Silo had been planning potential replacements almost from the moment Vader took his first mechanical breath. The implication was devastating. Vader's reconstruction was never intended to be permanent. He was always meant to be a stopgap solution, a temporary enforcer, while Silo perfected better alternatives. When Vader learned of this conspiracy, his rage was absolute. The discovery that his master had been preparing to replace him struck at the core of his identity. Everything Vader had done, every mission he had completed, every enemy he had destroyed, every terrible act he had committed in service to the Empire, all of it had been performed while Palpatine was simultaneously grooming potential successors, treating his chosen apprentice as expendable, planning for the day when Vader would be discarded like a broken tool. Vader's response demonstrated both his ruthlessness and his cunning. Rather than confront Palpatine directly, a confrontation he would likely lose, Vader set about systematically eliminating the competition. He hunted down Silo's creations one by one, demonstrating that despite his supposed obsolescence, he remained the most effective killer the Empire possessed. Each confrontation showcased different aspects of Vader's abilities: his mastery of the Force, his combat skills, his tactical intelligence, his willingness to use any method necessary to achieve victory. But Vader did not simply kill his potential replacements. He manipulated events to make it appear that Silo and his creations were traitors, that they were plotting against the Emperor, that the entire program represented a threat to Imperial security rather than a legitimate succession plan. Through careful machinations, Vader positioned himself as the loyal servant uncovering treachery, rather than the threatened apprentice eliminating competition. The false flag operation worked. Silo and his surviving creations were forced to flee, branded as traitors, their program discredited. Vader had successfully defended his position, proving himself more valuable than any artificially enhanced replacement. He had demonstrated that raw creativity, tactical thinking, and understanding of power dynamics were more important than physical capabilities or technological enhancements. Yet Vader never forgot the betrayal. The knowledge that Palpatine had been planning replacements for 20 years fundamentally altered their relationship. Whatever loyalty or respect Vader might have felt toward his master was contaminated by the understanding that he was never truly trusted, never truly valued as anything more than a useful tool that could be discarded when something better became available. This conspiracy revealed several important truths about the Sith and about Palpatine's particular approach to power. First, it demonstrated that traditional Sith succession, where an apprentice eventually overthrows the master, was something Palpatine had no intention of allowing. He was preparing contingencies, ensuring that even if Vader was destroyed, the Emperor would have other options, other enforcers, other ways to project his will across the galaxy. Second, it showed Palpatine's willingness to hedge his bets. The Sith rule of two dictated that there should be only a master and an apprentice. Yet Palpatine was clearly operating outside these traditional constraints, maintaining multiple potential Force users in reserve, treating the ancient Sith traditions as guidelines rather than absolute rules. This was consistent with his approach throughout his reign. Use tradition when convenient, discard it when necessary, always prioritize personal power over philosophical consistency. Third, the conspiracy illustrated how Palpatine viewed relationships. To the Emperor, even his apprentice was simply an asset to be managed, a resource to be utilized, a tool that might eventually need replacing. There was no loyalty, no real bond beyond usefulness. Vader was powerful and feared, yes, but power and fear were not unique. They could potentially be replicated, engineered, manufactured through genetic manipulation and cybernetic enhancement. Palpatine was willing to invest decades and enormous resources in creating alternatives because he trusted no one completely, not even his most important servant. This understanding that authentic dark side power could not be artificially replicated may have been what ultimately convinced Palpatine to abandon the replacement program after Vader eliminated the competition and exposed the conspiracy. The Emperor seemed to accept that his current apprentice, for all his limitations, was superior to any manufactured alternative. The relationship between master and apprentice continued, though forever changed by the revelation of intended replacement. There were likely other considerations as well. The replacement program was expensive, requiring cutting-edge technology and diverting resources from other imperial projects. It was also potentially dangerous, creating multiple Force-sensitive warriors, even in secret, risked exposing the Sith presence more widely, potentially creating future problems. And there was always the chance that one of the replacements might prove more rebellious than Vader, might turn against the Emperor in ways that were harder to control. But perhaps most importantly, Vader had proven himself. By eliminating the competition, by outmaneuvering Silo, by demonstrating that he was more than just a cybernetic shell with Force powers. Vader had validated Palpatine's original choice. The fallen chosen one, even diminished from his potential, was still the most effective enforcer available. The replacement program was not needed because the original was actually irreplaceable. The conspiracy of potential replacements left lasting scars on Vader's psyche. He became more paranoid, more suspicious of Imperial scientists and their projects. He also became more aggressive in proving his value, taking on the most dangerous missions, eliminating threats with maximum efficiency, demonstrating again and again that he was worth keeping, that no replacement could match his effectiveness. There is a tragic irony in this dynamic. Vader, who had been Anakin Skywalker, who had once been loved and valued by people like Padmé and Obi-Wan, was now in a relationship where his worth was constantly being evaluated, where he had to prove his right to exist, where his master was always considering alternatives. The conspiracy to replace him confirmed what Vader likely already suspected, that he was alone, that no one truly valued him, that his only worth was his usefulness as an instrument of power and fear. Yet this conspiracy also planted seeds that would eventually contribute to Vader's redemption. The knowledge that Palpatine had never truly valued him, had always been preparing to discard him, made it psychologically easier for Vader to eventually turn against his master. When the critical moment came on the second Death Star, when Vader saw his son being tortured by Force lightning, the choice to betray Palpatine was not just about saving Luke, it was also about rejecting a master who had never truly respected him, who had spent decades planning to replace him, who viewed their relationship as purely transactional. The replacement conspiracy stands as one of the most personal betrayals in Vader's long litany of betrayals. It was not just that Palpatine was willing to replace him. That was, after all, consistent with Sith tradition. It was that the Emperor had been planning replacements from almost the very beginning, that the entire time Vader had been serving loyally, executing missions, building the Imperial regime, his master had been treating him as temporary, as obsolete, as a prototype model that would eventually be superseded by something better. Dr. Silo's program was eventually disbanded, its facilities destroyed, its research scattered or classified beyond access. But the conspiracy's impact lingered. It reminded Vader that in the world of the Sith, there is no true loyalty, no real value placed on individuals beyond their immediate usefulness. Power is all that matters, and those who serve power do so only as long as they remain the most effective tools available. The moment something better comes along, the old tools are discarded, forgotten, replaced without sentiment or second thought. In a final twist of irony, Vader himself would eventually become the Emperor's replacement, not in the way Silo had imagined, but in the ultimate sense. When Vader threw Palpatine down the shaft of the second Death Star, when he ended his master's life and chose redemption over service to darkness, he effectively replaced the Emperor with his son, Luke Skywalker, as the hope for the galaxy's future. The conspiracy to replace Vader ended with Vader replacing Palpatine, not with a new enforcer, but with a new vision, one where love and sacrifice mattered more than power and control. The tool that was meant to be replaceable ultimately proved irreplaceable, and in doing so, changed the fate of the galaxy. When Order 66 was executed and the Jedi Order collapsed in a single day of coordinated slaughter, Emperor Palpatine understood that the purge was only the beginning. Clone troopers had killed thousands of Jedi across the galaxy, executing the command that reclassified their former generals as traitors. But clones followed orders with military precision, not with the supernatural tracking abilities needed to hunt Force-sensitive survivors who had gone into hiding. For the next phase of the Great Jedi Purge, Palpatine needed hunters who understood how Jedi thought, how they used the Force, how they might hide and survive. The solution was as brilliant as it was horrifying. Use Jedi to hunt Jedi, but not just any Jedi. Palpatine needed fallen Jedi, corrupted Jedi, Jedi who had turned against everything they once believed and now served the dark side with the zealotry of the newly converted. Thus was born the Inquisitorius, an organization that would exist in secrecy for decades, that would terrorize Force-sensitive survivors across the galaxy, and that would itself be subject to one of the most disturbing conspiracies in Imperial history. The conspiracy began with a selection process. During the Clone Wars, Palpatine had planted agents throughout the Jedi Temple, seemingly loyal staff members, maintenance workers, even a few trusted administrators who were actually Sith cultists or dark side sympathizers. These agents had a specific mission: identify Jedi who showed signs of dissatisfaction with the Order, who questioned the Council's decisions, who demonstrated the kind of emotional attachment or moral flexibility that might make them vulnerable to corruption. One such Jedi was Iskat Akarais, who would become the 13th sister. Akarais had long felt that the Jedi Order did not fully value her, that her superiors dismissed her concerns, that the rigid adherence to dogma prevented her from using her full potential. When Order 66 was executed, the clone troopers accompanying her did not immediately open fire. Instead, they surrounded her and presented a hologram message from Palpatine himself. The Emperor's offer was straightforward: reject the Jedi way, embrace the power she had been denied, serve the new order, and survive. Refuse and die like the rest of her kind. Akaris, faced with this choice in a moment of confusion and fear, chose survival. She chose power. She chose betrayal. And in doing so, she became one of the first Inquisitors. This pattern was repeated with select Jedi across the galaxy. Not many. The conspiracy required careful selection, targeting only those who were most vulnerable to turning, but enough to form the initial core of the Inquisitorius. Some, like Akaris, were given the choice at the moment of Order 66. Others were captured alive, imprisoned, tortured until their connection to the light side broke and darkness flooded in to fill the void. The transformation was never pretty, but it was effective. Particularly disturbing was the case of Tuwalan Yaluna, Akaris's friend and fellow Jedi. When he witnessed her betrayal, rage consumed him. He attacked his own clone troopers in fury, not understanding that this rage was exactly what Palpatine wanted. The clones were ordered to capture him alive rather than kill him. Through torture, through exposure to his friend's fall, through the systematic breaking of his spirit, Yaluna was also converted, becoming another Inquisitor through suffering rather than choice. The second sister, Trilla Suduri, had a different path to the Inquisitorius. She survived Order 66 alongside her master, Sere Junda, and for a time they eluded Imperial forces, but eventually they were betrayed, captured, and separated. Trilla was subjected to intensive torture and conditioning, her mind broken and rebuilt in the image Palpatine desired. By the time her transformation was complete, she had become one of the most effective and ruthless Inquisitors, hunting surviving Jedi with the intimate knowledge of one who had once been their ally. What made the Inquisitorius particularly insidious was that it served multiple purposes. On the surface, it was simply an organization for hunting Jedi survivors, former Jedi who knew how their targets thought, how they would hide, where they might seek refuge. The Inquisitors could sense Force-sensitive individuals, could recognize Jedi techniques and strategies, could track their former comrades with greater efficiency than any non-Force-sensitive agent. But the deeper conspiracy was that the Inquisitorius was also about eliminating potential threats before they could mature. Alongside their mission to hunt surviving Jedi, the Inquisitors had a second, equally important objective: find Force-sensitive children before they could be trained as Jedi, before they could become threats to the Empire. This program was called Project Harvester, and it was perhaps the darkest aspect of the Inquisitorious conspiracy. The conspiracy extended to how the Inquisitorious was structured and controlled. Darth Vader was placed in command of the organization responsible for training the fallen Jedi in the ways of the dark side. This gave Vader considerable power. His own force of dark side agents, loyal in theory to him, operating with significant autonomy across the galaxy. The Grand Inquisitor served as the operational leader, managing day-to-day activities, but Vader remained the ultimate authority over the program. Palpatine's willingness to grant Vader such power over the Inquisitorious seems surprising given the Emperor's general tendency to maintain tight control. But it served multiple purposes in the conspiracy. First, it kept Vader occupied with an important mission, giving him a sense of purpose and authority that might prevent him from focusing too much on plots against the Emperor. Second, it ensured that the Inquisitors remained deliberately limited in their training. Vader taught them enough dark side technique to be effective hunters, but not enough to make them true Sith. Not enough for any individual Inquisitor to potentially challenge either Vader or the Emperor. The Inquisitors were trained to change their fighting style from the defensive techniques they had learned as Jedi to aggressive, offensive combat. Their spinning double-bladed lightsabers symbolized this transformation. Weapons that looked menacing, that could create intimidating visual displays, but that were ultimately less refined than the elegant lightsaber techniques of true Jedi Masters or Sith Lords. The Inquisitors were meant to be effective against weaker targets, but vulnerable to truly powerful Force users, a deliberate limitation that ensured the Sith's supremacy. Vader's training methods were brutal. Some Inquisitors lost limbs during their sessions with the Dark Lord, learning through pain and disfigurement what it meant to fail. This served both as punishment and as a practical lesson, showing them what awaited them if they proved insufficient, motivating them to improve or face worse consequences. The atmosphere within the Inquisitorious was one of constant fear and competition. Each Inquisitor striving to prove themselves superior to their peers, knowing that failure might mean death or mutilation. The conspiracy also involved deliberately fostering rivalry and conflict among the Inquisitors themselves. Palpatine and Vader encouraged power struggles within the organization, pitting Inquisitors against each other in competitions to achieve objectives or prove their worth. This served several purposes. It kept the Inquisitors focused on each other, rather than potentially uniting against their Sith Masters. It ensured that only the most capable survived and continued serving, and it prevented the formation of bonds or loyalties that might lead to organized resistance. There are documented cases of Inquisitors being executed for developing attachments to each other. The 11th sister and 12th brother, who fell in love, were terminated on Vader's order when their relationship was discovered. The message was clear. Inquisitors were tools, not people. They were allowed no personal connections, no loyalties beyond service to the Empire and to the dark side. Any deviation from this was dealt with lethally. Yet, the most disturbing conspiracy involving the Inquisitorius concerns what happened when the program was eventually discontinued. By the time of A New Hope, the Inquisitors had vanished. Grand Moff Tarkin, discussing Force users with Admiral Motti, mentions that Vader is all that's left of their religion, implying that other Force users in Imperial service were no longer present. Where did the Inquisitors go? The official explanation is that most were killed in the line of duty. Hunting surviving Jedi was dangerous work, and many Inquisitors died in combat against their former comrades. The Grand Inquisitor was killed by Kanan Jarrus on Lothal. The sixth brother died fighting Ahsoka Tano. The fifth brother, seventh sister, and eighth brother were all killed on Malachor by Darth Maul. Other Inquisitors fell in various missions, gradually reducing their numbers over the years following Order 66. But there is a darker theory, one that suggests a conspiracy even more chilling than the Inquisitorius's original purpose. This theory proposes that when the Inquisitor program was deemed complete, when enough Jedi had been eliminated that the remaining survivors posed minimal threat, Palpatine ordered the execution of all remaining Inquisitors. A Second Order 66, this time targeting his own dark side agents, eliminating loose ends and potential future problems. The evidence for this theory is circumstantial but compelling. The Inquisitors disappeared remarkably quickly and thoroughly for an organization that had operated across the galaxy for over a decade. There were no documented retirements, no Inquisitors who left the service and settled into quiet civilian life. They simply vanished, and by the time. Galactic historian Beaumont Kin, researching the Inquisitorius years after the Empire's fall, expressed suspicion about this disappearance. Given Emperor Palpatine's documented tendency to eliminate threats and dispose of assets, once they were no longer useful, Kin theorized that the Inquisitors were systematically executed once their primary mission was accomplished. After all, they were former Jedi who had turned to the dark side, individuals who had already betrayed their principles once and might do so again. From Palpatine's perspective, keeping them around once they were no longer needed represented an unnecessary risk. The theory suggests several possible methods of elimination. One scenario involves Darth Vader personally hunting down remaining Inquisitors, perhaps under orders from the Emperor, perhaps on his own initiative as he came to see them as potential threats or competitors. Vader certainly had both the power and the motivation. He had never fully trusted the Inquisitors, seeing them as fallen Jedi who lacked the commitment to the dark side that came from genuine loss and suffering. Eliminating them would remove potential challenges to his position as the Emperor's sole apprentice. Another scenario suggests a coordinated military operation, similar to Order 66 itself. Imperial military units might have received coded commands to execute any Inquisitors they encountered, turning the hunters into the hunted. Stormtroopers who had fought alongside Inquisitors would suddenly turn their weapons on their former allies, repeating the betrayal that had destroyed the Jedi Order years earlier. This would have been particularly effective because Inquisitors, operating in small groups or individually, would have been vulnerable to sudden ambush by larger military forces. A third possibility involves turning the Inquisitors against each other. The atmosphere of rivalry and competition within the Inquisitorius could have been exploited, with false intelligence suggesting that one Inquisitor was plotting against another, or orders given to eliminate a traitorous colleague. The organization might have essentially destroyed itself through internal conflict, orchestrated by Palpatine's manipulation. Whatever the method, the result was the same. By the time of the original trilogy, the Inquisitorius had ceased to exist. The conspiracy of using Jedi to hunt Jedi had served its purpose and been dissolved, its participants disposed of, its records classified or destroyed, leaving only vague rumors and historical fragments to hint at its existence. The Inquisitorius conspiracy reveals several disturbing truths about the Empire and about the nature of service to the dark side. It demonstrates that even those who served Palpatine loyally, even those who betrayed their former principles and committed terrible acts in his name, were never truly safe, never truly valued beyond their immediate usefulness. The Inquisitors gave up everything they had once believed, turned against their former comrades, committed atrocities in service to the Empire, and their reward was likely execution once they were no longer needed. It also shows the fundamental disposability of individuals in Palpatine's empire. The Inquisitors were not people with their own agency and future. They were tools, weapons, resources to be expended in pursuit of the Emperor's goals. When those goals were achieved, when the primary threat of surviving Jedi had been neutralized, the tools were discarded, eliminated, erased from the galaxy as thoroughly as they had helped erase the Jedi Order. For the few Inquisitors who potentially survived, and there may have been some who managed to escape, to go into hiding, to abandon their former identity, the conspiracy of their creation and intended destruction must have been a bitter revelation. They had betrayed everything they once stood for, had become instruments of oppression and murder, had transformed themselves into the very darkness they once fought against. And in the end, their own masters had planned to dispose of them, viewing them as no more valuable than any other expendable asset. The Inquisitorius stands as one of the most complete conspiracies in Imperial history. From its secret origins in agents planted within the Jedi Order during the Clone Wars, through the calculated conversion of selected Jedi at the moment of Order 66, through Project Harvester and the hunting of Force-sensitive children, through the brutal training and internal competition fostered by Vader and Palpatine, to its eventual dissolution and the probable execution of its members. It was a conspiracy of corruption, a systematic program to transform light into darkness, and ultimately a conspiracy of disposal, eliminating even those who served its purposes once their usefulness had ended. The Schism Imperial, conspiracy against the Emperor. One of the most audacious conspiracies surrounding Darth Vader was not one perpetrated against him, but one he participated in. A complex plot to overthrow Emperor Palpatine himself. Known as the Schism Imperial, this conspiracy revealed a depths of deception and manipulation that stretched even the considerable imaginations of those familiar with Sith treachery. What made this conspiracy particularly remarkable was that Palpatine not only knew about it, but actively encouraged it, turning Vader's plot into a twisted game of power, where even rebellion was orchestrated by the Master being rebelled against. The Schism Imperial was formed by Administrator Sly Moore, a shadowy figure in the Imperial hierarchy who had served as one of Palpatine's close advisors since the Clone Wars, or was Force-sensitive, though not trained as either Jedi or Sith. She had a talent for political manipulation and intrigue, skills that made her valuable to the Emperor. What few knew was that Moore's primary function was not simply as an advisor, but as a honeypot, a lure, a tempter who would identify ambitious Imperial officers and officials who might be persuaded to join a conspiracy against the Emperor. Moore approached these potential conspirators carefully, sounding them out, gauging their frustration with Palpatine's rule, their ambitions for power, their willingness to risk treason if the potential rewards were great enough. She painted a picture of an empire freed from Palpatine's increasingly erratic leadership, an empire that could be more efficient, more rational, more successful under different guidance. And gradually, she assembled a secret society of conspirators, the Schism Imperial. The conspiracy needed a leader, someone powerful enough to potentially challenge the Emperor, someone with both military force and symbolic authority. There was only one logical candidate, Darth Vader. But Vader, for all his power, had always been portrayed as the Emperor's loyal enforcer. How could Moore persuade him to join a plot against his master? The answer lay in Vader's own growing dissatisfaction. By this point in his service to the Empire, Vader had discovered several of Palpatine's conspiracies against him. He knew about the attempted replacement program with Silo's creations. He had encountered situations where the Emperor seemed to be testing him, pushing him, possibly preparing to discard him. Vader's loyalty, such as it was, had eroded into pragmatic calculation. He served Palpatine because he saw no viable alternative, not out of genuine devotion. Moore approached Vader with an offer, the resources and support to overthrow Palpatine, to claim the position of Emperor for himself, to rule the galaxy without the constant supervision and manipulation of a Sith Master. She could provide loyal forces, strategic resources, intelligence about the Emperor's vulnerabilities. All Vader needed to do was lead the Schism Imperial, provide the power and leadership that would make the rebellion successful. Vader, recognizing an opportunity, agreed. He began working with the Schism Imperial, using Moore's intelligence to identify resources he could acquire, weapons he could secure, forces he could position. Most significantly, he obtained access to two critical assets: a massive droid army constructed in secret and a planetary weapon called the Death Machine, stolen from a rebel outpost, capable of draining entire worlds of energy and converting that energy into power for Imperial weapons and shields. With these resources, Vader seemed poised to seriously threaten Palpatine's rule. The droid army provided military force independent of the Imperial command structure. The Death Machine provided a world-killing capability that could rival the destroyed Death Star. Combined with Vader's own considerable power and the support of conspirators throughout the Imperial hierarchy, the Schism Imperial represented a genuine threat to the Emperor's control. But Here is where the conspiracy became truly Byzantine in its complexity. Palpatine knew everything. Sly Moore was not a genuine conspirator. She was a double agent, reporting every development directly to the Emperor. Every recruit to the Schism Imperial, every resource obtained, every plan discussed, all of it was known to Palpatine practically as it happened. The entire conspiracy was a setup, a trap, a test orchestrated by the Emperor himself. Why would Palpatine allow such a conspiracy to proceed? Why let Vader accumulate dangerous weapons and loyal forces? The answer reveals much about the Sith Master's understanding of power and control. Palpatine wanted Vader to rebel. He wanted his apprentice to gather strength, to prepare for overthrow, to accumulate resources. And then, when Vader had committed fully to the conspiracy, when he had invested everything into the plot, Palpatine intended to crush it, demonstrating his absolute superiority, reminding Vader and everyone else that even the most carefully planned rebellion was futile against the Emperor's power. But there was a deeper purpose as well. In traditional Sith philosophy, the apprentice is meant to eventually overthrow the master. It is how the Sith grow stronger, how they ensure that only the most powerful rule. Palpatine had no intention of actually allowing this to happen to him, but he recognized the value in Vader attempting it. The process of plotting rebellion, of gathering resources and planning strategies, of becoming strong enough to challenge the Emperor. This process would make Vader more powerful, more capable, more effective as an enforcer. Palpatine intended to let Vader gather strength, then take that strength for himself. This becomes explicit in comics depicting the conspiracy. When Moore reports to Palpatine about Vader's progress, the Emperor expresses satisfaction. "Let him gather his strength and bring it to me," Palpatine says essentially. He wants Vader to become more powerful, specifically so that when he crushes the rebellion, he can claim Vader's accumulated resources as his own. The Death Machine, the droid army, the loyal conspirators, all would eventually belong to the Emperor, gifts brought to him by his rebellious apprentice. This conspiracy within conspiracy demonstrates the level of psychological manipulation Palpatine exercised over Vader. The Emperor understood his apprentice well enough to predict not only that Vader would eventually plot against him, but approximately when and how and with what resources. He created the perfect circumstances for that rebellion to occur, provided the temptation through Moore, allowed it to proceed just far enough to be convincing, and prepared to spring his trap at the moment of Vader's maximum commitment. What's particularly cruel about this conspiracy is that it gave Vader hope. For a time, the Dark Lord believed he had found a path to freedom from Palpatine's control. He believed that with the Schism Imperial's resources, he could finally achieve the power he had been promised when he turned to the dark side. The Emperor and apprentice could rule together, Palpatine had said, but in practice, Palpatine ruled alone and Vader served. The Schism Imperial seemed to offer a chance to change that dynamic, to finally claim the power Vader felt he deserved. But it was all illusion, all carefully orchestrated manipulation. Vader was not escaping Palpatine's control. He was falling deeper into it. Every move he made in support of the conspiracy, every resource he acquired, every plan he developed, all of it was observed, permitted, controlled by the very master he sought to overthrow. The rebellion was not against the system, but part of it. Not a conspiracy against Palpatine, but a conspiracy designed by Palpatine to strengthen his own position. The ultimate fate of the Schism Imperial remains somewhat ambiguous in canonical sources. By the time of Return of the Jedi, Vader is once again serving Palpatine loyally, or at least obediently, suggesting that the conspiracy either never fully came to fruition or was crushed as the Emperor intended. Vader's eventual turn against Palpatine to save Luke would come years later, motivated not by ambition for power, but by love for his son, something Palpatine could not predict or manipulate because he fundamentally did not understand such emotions. The Schism Imperial conspiracy reveals several important truths about the relationship between Vader and Palpatine. First, it demonstrates that Vader never truly stopped looking for ways to escape his master's control. Despite his outward loyalty, despite decades of service, Vader was always calculating, always seeking opportunities, always hoping to break free. This was not necessarily admirable. His motivations were ambition and resentment rather than moral awakening. But it showed that even completely fallen, the man who had been Anakin Skywalker never entirely stopped fighting. Second, it reveals Palpatine's absolute paranoia and need for control. The Emperor could not simply trust his apprentice's loyalty or believe that Vader would remain subordinate. He had to create elaborate tests, orchestrate fake conspiracies, manipulate even rebellions against himself to ensure he remained supreme. This need for control, this inability to trust even his most powerful servant, was both Palpatine's strength and his fatal flaw. It made him nearly impossible to overthrow through conventional means, but it also meant he could not recognize genuine change in Vader when it occurred, could not imagine that his apprentice might act for reasons beyond ambition. The Schism Imperial also connects to broader theories about Palpatine's long-term planning. Some have suggested that the Emperor was not just manipulating Vader, but was testing the very concept of apprenticeship. If an apprentice could be convinced to plot rebellion, and that rebellion could be controlled and harvested for its resources, then the traditional Sith cycle of master and apprentice overthrowing each other could be broken. The master would remain supreme indefinitely, with apprentices serving as useful tools who periodically gathered strength that the master would then absorb. It was a perversion of Sith tradition, replacing the dynamic of growth through conflict with eternal stasis under one supreme ruler. The conspiracy also raises questions about how much Vader knew or suspected. Did he truly believe the Schism Imperial was secret from Palpatine? Or did he recognize that Moore might be a double agent, that his plans were likely known, but proceed anyway because he had no better options? The evidence suggests Vader was at least partially deceived. His genuine investment in gathering resources and developing strategies indicates he believed the conspiracy had a real chance of success. But he also understood Palpatine well enough to know the Emperor was always 10 steps ahead, always manipulating circumstances even when he appeared vulnerable. There's a tragic element to the Schism Imperial as well. For all the planning, for all the resources gathered, for all the careful conspiracy and manipulation, Vader's ultimate turn against Palpatine would come at a moment of pure emotion, of spontaneous choice, of love overwhelming calculation. The elaborate plots and strategies all came to nothing. In the end, it was not ambition, but humanity that allowed Vader to break free from his master's control. And that is the one thing that all the conspiracies, all the manipulations, all the Sith schemes could not predict or prevent. The Schism Imperial remains one of the most complex conspiracies in Star Wars lore, a plot within a plot, a rebellion that was permitted and manipulated, a path to power that led right back to subservience. It showed that even when Vader tried to break free, even when he gathered forces and made plans and prepared to strike, he was still trapped in Palpatine's web of manipulation. The conspiracy against the Emperor was a conspiracy the Emperor designed, and that truth is perhaps more terrifying than any of the elaborate schemes and secret plots that filled Vader's decades of service to darkness. Only when Vader finally stopped conspiring, when he acted from impulse rather than calculation, from love rather than ambition, from a father's instinct to protect his child, rather than from any complex plot or long-term plan, only then did he break free. The conspiracies failed. The spontaneous choice succeeded, and in that final act, Vader destroyed both the Schism Imperial's elaborate plans and the Emperor who had manipulated them all along, achieving in death what all his calculated conspiracies had failed to accomplish in life. Closing meditation, the web of deception. As we emerge from these depths of shadow and conspiracy, as we step back from the labyrinth of plots and counterplots that surrounded Darth Vader, a pattern becomes clear. The Dark Lord's entire existence, from his mysterious conception to his redemptive death, was wrapped in layers of conspiracy. Secret plans, hidden manipulations, schemes within schemes. This was the air Vader breathed, the environment he inhabited, the only world he knew. We have journeyed through the conspiracy of his hidden identity, where the galaxy's greatest hero became its most feared monster without anyone connecting one to the other. We explored the disturbing possibility that his very conception was engineered by Sith manipulation, that Anakin Skywalker was created before he was born. We examined the armor that both saved his life and imprisoned him, a suit designed with weakness to keep him controllable. We discovered Silo's replacement program, 20 years of developing alternatives in case Vader proved insufficient. We delved into the inquisitorious and the dark conspiracy of using Jedi to hunt Jedi, of Project Harvester and kidnapped children, of an organization that was probably betrayed and eliminated once its purpose was served. And we witnessed the audacious Schism Imperial, a conspiracy to overthrow the Emperor that was itself orchestrated by the Emperor, a rebellion designed to fail while serving its master's purposes. These major conspiracies were supplemented by countless smaller ones, plots by Imperial officers who resented Vader's authority, schemes by crime lords and separatist remnants seeking to exploit or eliminate him, the Emperor's constant tests and manipulations designed to keep his apprentice off balance and dependent. Vader existed in a permanent state of conspiracy, where trust was impossible, where every relationship was transactional, where even his master's commands might be tests or traps. This raises a final question. What was the ultimate conspiracy? Was it Palpatine's plan to create and control Vader, keeping him powerful enough to be useful, but limited enough to be safe? Or was it the Force's plan all along, using even Palpatine's manipulations to set up circumstances for Vader's eventual redemption, for the Chosen One to fulfill his destiny by destroying the Sith? Perhaps both. Perhaps the greatest conspiracy of all was that every plot, every manipulation, every carefully laid plan by Palpatine and others ultimately served a larger purpose. The armor that imprisoned Vader also gave him the strength to survive long enough to save his son. The replacement program that revealed Palpatine's lack of trust helped plant seeds of doubt that would grow into rebellion. The hidden identity that protected Palpatine's political narrative also meant Luke could be raised without knowing his father's darkness, could become the Jedi who would ultimately reach Anakin Skywalker behind Vader's mask. The conspiracies surrounding Darth Vader are ultimately a study in the limits of control and the persistence of free will. Palpatine tried to control everything, to manipulate every variable, to ensure that even rebellion served his purposes. But in the critical moment, when Vader chose to save Luke, when he chose sacrifice over self-preservation, when he chose love over power, all the conspiracies, all the manipulations, all the carefully constructed schemes collapsed. Free will, in one spontaneous choice, achieved what decades of conspiring could not. The legacy of these conspiracies extends far beyond Vader's death. The hidden identity conspiracy continued for nearly 30 years after Endor, shaping galactic politics and ultimately affecting his grandchild, Ben Solo. The questions about his creation remain debated by historians. The armor has become both a symbol of fear and a reminder of the price of falling to darkness. The Inquisitorius left trauma across the galaxy, Force-sensitive survivors forever marked by the fallen Jedi who hunted them. The schemes against the Emperor, successful and failed, demonstrated that even absolute power cannot eliminate all resistance or predict all choices. If we have learned anything from exploring these conspiracies, it is that in the world of the Sith, nothing is as it seems. Every apparent loyalty may hide betrayal. Every offer of power may contain hidden limitations. Every alliance is temporary. Every partnership instrumental. Every relationship transactional. Trust is weakness. Openness is vulnerability. Truth is whatever serves the speaker's purpose in the moment. Yet, we have also learned that such a world contains the seeds of its own destruction. When everything is a lie, when everyone is a potential betrayer, when all relationships are purely about power and control, genuine human connection becomes revolutionary. Love becomes the ultimate act of rebellion. Sacrifice, the choice to value someone else more than yourself, becomes incomprehensible to those who have lived in the conspiracy shadows for so long. Darth Vader, born from conspiracy, shaped by manipulation, imprisoned by schemes, ultimately broke free through the one thing that all the conspiracies could not account for, the love of a father for his son, strong enough to override decades of darkness, powerful enough to make him choose death over his son's suffering. In that moment, all the elaborate plots, all the careful manipulations, all the conspiracies that had defined Vader's existence became irrelevant. What mattered was not which conspiracy succeeded or failed, not who manipulated whom, not whether Palpatine's plans or the Force's will would prevail, but simply that a father chose to save his child. The conspiracies of Darth Vader are a reminder that history is shaped by both vast impersonal forces and individual choices, by grand schemes and momentary decisions, by decades of planning and instants of action. They show us that even the most carefully controlled situation can be disrupted by the unpredictable, that even the most powerful manipulator can fail to account for genuine emotion, that even the darkest fall can end in redemption. As you drift toward sleep, as these stories of conspiracy and counter-conspiracy fade into dream, remember that the greatest conspiracy was that Vader, despite everything done to him and everything he did, remained capable of choice, trapped in a suit designed with weaknesses, serving a master who had been planning his replacement, existing in a web of plots and lies so dense that truth became almost impossible to find. He still, in the end, chose. And that choice, more than any conspiracy or counter-conspiracy, more than any elaborate plot or grand design, that simple choice to save his son defined his legacy and changed the fate of the galaxy. These are the conspiracies of Darth Vader, complex, disturbing, revealing, and ultimately transcended by something more powerful than any scheme or plot. The Force, working through all these conspiracies, and despite them, brought balance in the end, not through careful planning or manipulation, but through love, sacrifice, and the choice of a father in a single moment of clarity. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden machinations and secret plots surrounding one of Star Wars' most iconic figures, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting that like button. There are many more secrets in the shadows of Star Wars lore, many more conspiracies to explore, many more hidden truths waiting to be uncovered. Join us again as we continue to explore the darkness, always searching for the light that persists even in the deepest shadow.